Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, and welcome to Opera 101 with the Cleveland Opera Theater. My name is Stephanie Ruozzo, and I'm an Education and Outreach Associate with the Cleveland Opera Theater, here for another history-filled Opera 101. And Opera 101 is for all ages, so please grab everybody in your house, grab everybody who might even be remotely interested in music, because we're going to have a fun time with opera. And each day on our Monday through Friday series here, we discuss kind of one little historical or one little performance or one little engaging tidbit about opera that we can all enjoy. And we do really want you to engage with it. So please, if you have any questions at any time, please drop them in the comment box below and I will get to them right away. Or you can email them to our Director of Education and Outreach, Megan Thompson, at mthompson@clevelandoperatheater.org. That's MTHOMPSON at clevelandoperatheater.org. And so the thing that I would love to talk with you about today is the first bel canto. And well, bel canto is something most opera fans are kind of already familiar with. It's something that we hear a lot about in opera, and literally that is because the translation is beautiful song or beautiful singing. So it really goes along with opera, doesn't it? And it's a particular style of opera singing that became popular in the early 1800s, really flourishing around 1830. And it's all about this particular style of singing is all about vocal agility. It's all about having a light tone that can do this really rapid work. And I want to link it back too. If you watched Megan's earlier video about different voice types, then what you'll recognize is this idea of the coloratura. And that voice type really embodies bel canto, and that coloratura work emerged with bel canto singing in the early 1800s. So what it involves is really fast passage work, so scalar runs up and down the scale, back and forth, and these really wide arpeggios, so these really rapid leaps from note to note. And this type of singing is also characterized by, it's what we call melismatic, which is just a fancy word for having a lot of notes set to one syllable of text. So whenever you hear singers putting a lot of notes together without necessarily re-articulating a consonant, then that's melismatic, whenever you have a lot of notes for one syllable of a word. And the composers that really embody bel canto as we know it are Gioacchino Rossini, Vincenzo Bellini, and Gaetano Donizetti. And these composers emerged in the early 1800s. But we didn't start calling their type of composition bel canto until much later in the mid to late 1800s. And this term, bel canto, emerged in retrospect as we look back so that we can contrast the music of Rossini, Bellini, and Donizetti with this heavier, weightier, dramatic Wagnerian style, which was much more declamatory, the opposite of melismatic, when we have one syllable of text set to one note. So, in opposition to this Wagnerian heavy stuff that was emerging, people talking about music in the mid to late 1800s imposed this term bel canto on early 1800s opera composers to contrast this old style versus a new style. But here's the fascinating thing. The Germans used bel canto in a different way. And Germans basically invented the field, the discipline of musicology or music history as we know it. So we kind of have to give the Germans their due on this one. And I'm going to quote Owen Yonder and Ellen T. Harris on this one. So if you don't mind, I'm going to be slightly professorial for just a second here. Quote, German musicology in the early 1900s devised its own historical application for bel canto, using the term to refer to the simple lyricism that came to the fore in Venetian opera and the Roman cantata during the 1630s and 40s, the era of Cesti, Carissimi, and Luigi Rossi, as a reaction against the earlier text-dominated stilo rappresentativo. end quote. That's a really long and fancy way of saying that what we think of as bel canto is not what earlier music historians thought of as bel canto. And there's this earlier age of music emerging, this earlier style of composition emerging that's also called bel canto. So remember from last week's little historical tidbit when we talked about the stile rappresentativo or the recitar cantando, where you're just basically reciting poetic lines heightened by melodic accents. And this recitar cantando, or what we came to know as recitative, of the early 1600s that we talked about last time, um, if you have too much of it all at once, it gets a little monotonous. We want to contrast things. We want some variety. So in the 1630s and 40s, especially in Venice and Rome, we saw a reaction against too much recitar cantando, too much stile rappresentativo. And the idea of poetic recitation that formed the first operas like Orfeo from 1607 that we talked about last time, we didn't want to let that get too monotonous. So in the 1630s and 40s, composers like Antonio Cesti, Giacomo Carissimi, and Luigi Rossi rebelled against the idea of text subjugating melody. In other words, remember when Monteverdi introduced his seconda pratica or stile moderno, and he said the text should be mistress of the music. And Cesti, Carissimi, and Rossi kind of fought against this idea that we shouldn't pay as much attention to the music as we do to the text. And suddenly, with these composers, operas were not all recitative anymore. They were not all recitar cantando. And the issue of verisimilitude, or problems with having characters express everything through song, were gone because audience had had a few decades to get used to the idea of opera where these characters sing in everyday life and they express themselves through singing quite naturally. So in the few decades between the invention of opera and the 1630s and 40s, when this first bel canto starts to emerge, suddenly people are like, oh, okay, it's not too weird to see people singing their stories. We can step away from this recited poetry and instead let them burst fully forth into these really lyrical melodic airs. But why Venice? Why did this happen in Venice? And the answer goes back to Monteverdi. So Monteverdi, that we talked about last time, the guy who became famous as a madrigal composer, but then composed what we could think of as one of the first operas. He was maestro di cappella at San Marco. In other words, he was the choir master, the chapel master there. And he was at St. Mark's in Venice, the inheritor of a long, renowned school of composition at that cathedral. And St. Mark's fostered, because they had these musical resources, they fostered some of the most renowned composers through centuries and centuries of musical innovation. And during Monteverdi's tenure at St. Mark's, he embraced the florid, expressive melodies of Venetian sacred and solo motets. And he applied them to his dramatic music. So he's taking these sacred songs that were sung in the cathedral and applying that type of melodic composition that we see in church. He's taking that type of melodic composition and applying it to these secular, large-scale operatic works. And what really characterizes this Venetian opera is an abundance of scalar runs and passage work, like we talked about that coloratura, written out ornaments. So instead, singers just wouldn't sing a note and hold it. They would begin by singing a note and then embellish it with all these beautiful twists and turns and ornaments. And we would see that now, thanks to Monteverdi, written out in the score. He would actually tell his performers, yes, we want you to pretty up these notes. and unexpected harmonies. Again, that idea of the seconda pratica, where if we hear something, or if the words are talking about something kind of painful or ugly, the harmony is going to reflect that. So we might have dissonant notes being played at the same time. We might have singers clash with each other, and that's all on purpose because it sounds so expressive. And of course, this idea of putting melismas on keywords to make those words stand out and be more expressive, and a stylistic freedom that was really contrasting with the solid blocks of recitar cantando that we had earlier in the century, just a few decades ago. So, in other words, the emphasis was on the solo voice in theaters. And we see that especially in Venice through their use of small orchestras and few choruses. It's all about solo work. And when that solo voice stands out, then we're free to have these beautiful lyric melodies that characterize bel canto. Well, so what does this first bel canto of the 1630s and 40s sound like? Quite different from what we would normally think of as bel canto. And I'm linking, as you'll see in the box, there's a link to a YouTube video from Warner Classics of a duet called Por Ti Miro. And this is from a Monteverdi opera. I invite you to please, please, please listen to that first bel canto duet and compare it to Rossini, Bellini, and Donizetti as you listen. What's the same about this duet and what's different? This particular duet is the grand finale of Monteverdi's last opera before his death, L'Incoronazione di Poppaea, or the Coronation of Poppaea from 1643. So right at the height, the golden sweet spot of this first bel canto. And it's a big love duet at the very end of the opera, just as the Emperor Nero has married his love Poppaea and crowned her empress, the coronation of Poppaea. So this love duet is the big finale. Notice the big finale doesn't rely on a huge chorus. It's all about solo work. And as these two solo voices join together in this mellifluous melody. And we can enjoy these and the other earlier operas for their beauty, just as much as the later war horses we're all familiar with, like Barbara of Seville and Lucia de Lammermoor. Even though these operas, these first bel canto operas, are 2 centuries older. And I hope that you enjoy this link that I'm providing you, and I hope that you find so much more from these earlier eras of opera that we all know and love. And embrace them for their beauty just as much as you would embrace anything from 200 years later. I want to give one final invitation for questions before we head out. Okay, please do email questions if they pop up at any time to mthompson@clevelandoperatheater.org, and I promise we will get back to them ASAP. If you had fun today, or you just want to know more about opera in general, please do like our Facebook page, or go to our website at clevelandoperatheater.org and sign up for our mailing list so that you can subscribe to all of our information that we're going to be sending you, especially during this time of quarantine. Please do join us tomorrow for our next Opera 101 session at the same time and place. And until then, I'll see you soon. Thank you, guys. Bye.